Welcome to a new episode of the Creative Industry Insight podcast. I'm your host, Bobby. For the final course of our Chaos menu covering FX's The Bear, we have a trio of desserts. The lineup includes recording mixer / supervising sound editor Major Giammaria, dialogue editor Evan Benjamin, and sound designer Jonathan Fuhrer. Please be warned there are heavy spoilers in the episode, so let's let it rip with the trio. So joining me today to talk about FX's The Bear is the sound team behind seasons 1 and 2. I've got Evan.
Evan, hi.
Major.
Hey, how you doing?
And John.
Evan, hi.
Oh, what a great start, guys. What a great start.
I know. Do you want to start again?
Should we start again? Let's keep going.
Fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
I like that.
We'll edit that out. Thanks for all you guys for joining me today. Yes, I feel slightly overwhelmed because I've got three guests on at the same time. Most I've had is two, so hopefully I can wrangle you guys like a good shepherd and be able to go through and talk about the sound on FX's The Bear.
We'll behave, I promise.
Yeah, you could call it one host, three guests.
Perfect.
One of those three guests. All right, I'm going to trademark that.
No one's going to reference that at all.
Before I sort of want to jump in to talk about the show, we've got two guests on whose roles we haven't had on before, which is Evan and Major. So first one's for you, Evan. What does the role of a dialogue editor entail?
Well, a dialogue editor is the person who is responsible for all the audio that was recorded on set and tries to wrangle it into some kind of shape where it actually is sort of a coherent whole. In other words, the scenes flow pretty smoothly. If you hit play, they just sort of play. And if you would be listening to it when I first get it, it doesn't sound like that at all. As the scene progresses from take to take, as the shots get switched back from in a normal edit that you watch, any kind of film or TV show, the sounds as they go from shot to shot are very different sounding. People sound different. Each actor is wearing a mic, and there might be one or two or even three boom mics as well. So that's a lot of microphones in a scene. And on every shot, you've got 12, 14, 15 more microphones running. And the idea is to just weave your way between all those and present something to Major, who'll be the next step in this because he's mixing the show as well. Give him something that he can actually work with. That's the base part of it. There's just also a lot of other stuff where you might go looking for other takes of a word. If an actor says something, but they don't say it, in case of The Bear, especially, like something giant drops on the end of their line, you might go searching through alternate takes and find them saying the word the same way again and replace it. Those are called alts. And that's just a very common thing you do too. That takes a lot of time depending. And then lastly, there's software we use that actually I can use to graphically clean the audio of any kind of extraneous noises that the actor's making, which can be there can be a lot of them. And that software has become more and more evolved over the years until now it's so sophisticated that you can really do a lot of things that you couldn't do even 5 years ago. So that's sort of a sum of the general idea of what it is to get all this material is a gigantic material dump you get, and you have to kind of turn that into something that is just this very simple, coherent start at playing a scene smoothly, and then I hand it off to Major.
I think that's quite fascinating to hear in terms of like going through different takes and sort of stitching together people's dialogues. But I can imagine that can be quite a very laborious process just because depending on how many there are takes and then what sounds right and then going back, there must be certain words that an actor probably says that must drive you crazy now that like you're trying to find that they can't, that you have to stitch together.
Well, again, like this stuff used to be harder, and software comes along now where I can dump every single piece of audio recorded in the course of production and into a program. I use something called SoundMiner, and I can just go through if it's scene 12 and there's a bunch of different takes from one angle and a bunch of different takes from another angle, it's pretty easy to figure out where in the scene that actor said that line and check every time. And actors say things differently because they're actors and they should be saying it differently. But sometimes you're lucky and they don't. Also, if something's an improv thing, like sometimes more of a comedy or scenes where actors are just freewheeling it, you're not going to be as lucky. And that's when ADR comes into play, which is the other part sometimes of my job. In the case of The Bear, the first season, I was doing the ADR, but it was quite minimal. We can talk about that later. But So that might be, if you can't find any replacement, then you have to have the actor come in and do it again.
I can imagine that as well. When you get someone getting in, like an actor to come in to say a line again, that must be quite. That must be sort of like a good back and forth between them as well, just because they have to get back into that scene and know what sort of tone they must hit as well, and how like they have to sort of play out the scene again. Really.
Yeah, some actors can do it intuitively and instantly, and others will never figure it out. It's just sort of a remarkable thing to watch. And it has nothing to do with how well known those actors are or how good they are at other things. It's just a unique skill that is, I think most actors just either tolerate it or actively dislike it, because it is unpleasant to have to probably go back into that mindset from whenever they shot it 6 months or a year ago and try to get back into that.
I think there's like a famous story about Shawshank Redemption where I think they've recorded Morgan Freeman's lines in a sort of day or in a morning, and then they lost the audio files, and then they had to redo it, but then it took them like 6 weeks because he had to get back into that sort of character and mindset, which must have been quite painful, just being in that booth the whole time trying to just get it right.
Well, I just think about the person who lost it. I just think that's the thing that you'd be most afraid of. And in doing what we do in general, we're always really, I think, very concerned about losing anything, especially with an actor. Kind of having an actor come in and do something again would, I think, be the absolute worst in terms of your having to come back and explain to somebody why that has to happen because you lost something. So that's a terrible story. It makes me even more careful than I already am.
Just moving now on to Major and his role. What does the role of re-recording mixer / supervising sound editor entail?
Yeah, I mean, it is really kind of two positions. I'm able on this show and a lot of shows I do to kind of do both. Supervising sound editor is just in charge of all of the editors. So I'm in charge of finding and hiring Evan and John. And then on season 2, we had a couple other editors join us, Matt Snedker on effects and John Werner on dialogue. And I actually had a co-supervisor, Andrea Bella, on season 2 because our schedule was a little bit bonkers. So I needed help managing everything. So yeah, supervising sound editor kind of just keeps, especially when you start getting multiple editors, you want to make sure the overarching flavor of the show stays the same, the style, organizing, schedule and budget and all of those utility things, but also making sure that like the door that they walk through is the same door in every episode and like that sort of stuff, which, on season 1, John was cutting everything. So that was a little bit easier, but also you just kind of managing all of that stuff. And then re-recording mixer, that's where I take all the stuff from all the different departments. So Evan's dialogue, John's effects, music from the music department, needle drops, ADR, all that stuff, blend it all together and make sure you can hear everything. The right things are going at the right time, cleaning dialogue even further after Evan gets it, which thankfully Evan does a great job. And also shout out to our production sound mixer, Scott Smith out of Chicago, does a great job because 15 people shouting in a kitchen is not an easy thing to record. So hat tip to him as well. So yeah, that's kind of the general overview of what I have to do.
I don't envy the production sound mixer sitting there and then trying to figure out what take is best and what works and what doesn't, especially if so many people are shouting and so much is going on.
He just has to do it cleanly. It's an incredibly challenging task. Like he was actually remarkable at it and worked on things that were somebody sitting at a desk being interviewed for a documentary and they sound terrible. And this is, people like Major said, they're all running around yelling at each other. And
sounds great
to capture most of it really, really cleanly, like astonishingly cleanly. Nice.
I think that's always like, I guess if I ever worked in sound, I think that'd always be like my biggest fear is that like being the production sound mixing, not getting stuff clearly.
No way I could do that. Not a chance. I wouldn't have the nerve for it.
And
I don't know.
Go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say like I've done like a little bit of production sound when I was younger, like just hopping on random gigs and documentary shoots, and it's the most nerve-wracking thing that like fuck, my recorder's gonna die, but like my recorder might die, the lav might get interference or something like that, and it's just it's a really stressful situation. So very much props to that whole team for being able to do that and stay cool under pressure.
Yeah, I mean the scene that they have to take care of. I guess also that set was very tight. So in terms of it being all the other complications, he's also got to deal with the physical maneuvering, or I mean, his boom ops do. He's not really in the room with them, but there are guys who just hold the booms and try to capture the sound by moving around with the camera guy and stay out of the shot. And that's Also, that just sounds like a terrible, like these jobs, that we're doing here, we get to sit in a nice quiet room most of the time. And that's why I would never do something. It's just that job must be so stressful. You're in the production, you're in the middle of all this stuff. You have long days, you deal with whatever weather it is. It's I just wouldn't have the stamina for something like that. I'm always impressed by those guys.
I think as well, like the boom operators, like the fact that you can hold this boom up and not get it in shot and just like have the sort of strength and patience to be able to just hold it, follow the actors and capture what you need. That's like always like impressive as well. It feels like they're doing like a mini marathon if they're doing like 100-day shoot or something like that.
Yeah, well, and look at that episode where they're all, the episode 7 of season 1, where they're just one continuous shot. Some guy is running around trying to stay on top of that action for however
20
long
minutes.
Shot it, 17 minutes.
Yeah.
Very, very challenging.
Yeah, and I bet you they're like in their mind, like trying to like psych themselves up. I wonder if they had to do any training or not as well, like just to, I'm ready. Let's jump into this.
Yeah, get some shoulder presses in. Yeah.
Yeah.
But moving on to the show itself, how have you found the reception of the show? There's award nominations, there's a lot of buzz online, there's a lot of memes and TikToks being generated. It must be quite fun to see as people who've worked on it to have so many people that sort of react so well and enjoy it so much.
Yeah, it's I'm famously really bad at telling if something I'm working on is going to hit or not. And I was pretty sure, I'm like, people are going to watch this, but the level with which it blew up is still surprising to me. People wear my original Burf shirt around and people are like, that show. I'm like, wow, that's like recognition. It's crazy.
Wait, I didn't get an original Burf shirt. Wait a minute.
Yeah, you got the backpack. It's, there's only so much swag to go around, Evan. Come on. Jeez, this guy. All the free shit I get you. Come on.
Yeah.
Buy your own. They're like $15.
Oh, really? Might do that.
Anyway, yeah. So just having that recognition, it's crazy. Yeah, to me, still, it doesn't make any sense, but it's great. I mean, it makes sense because it's a great show, but just to be associated with it is quite a treat for sure.
Yeah, I'm also, I watched it. I realized that, people are really interested in chefs and cooking culturally. That's just something that's a big deal last bunch of years, right? So I thought this would be a very successful show because it was also remarkable while you're working on it. While you work on it, you don't really get the sense of how good it is, but then you watch it back. Oh, I think this is pretty good. Then when you see it all put together, oh, it's even better than I originally thought, just working on the dialogue, for example. But I still was really taken aback by that. And I think that when people give you kudos for this, to some degree, they're also giving you kudos for everything else you've done over the years that have gotten you to the point where you could do this well, right? I think that that's somehow some part of how I'm looking at it, because there's a lot of things you've worked on where you don't get this kind of attention. The work you did was great. It's just that this is a fantastic bit of work by everybody. So everybody's work just comes under more attention, which is really nice.
Yeah, and I got to say, this show was designed for sound from the ground up. I mean, before we were even on it, Chris Storr, the co-creator and co-showrunner, had a very clear vision of like what the kitchen sounds like, having these stylized moments where John could go to town with like clock zooms and just crazy like beeps and whatever. You can't wedge good sound in after the fact. I think we've all worked on shows where they're like, yeah, we want it to sound like this. It's like, that's great, but you didn't shoot it like that. You didn't edit it like that. Like, all of our work is heavily dependent on what everyone else does. So you got to hit the trifecta of a show that people care about and is good, and you have to do good work, and it has to be conceptualized in a way where you can do good work and also different work, to stand out. So I think The Bear really lends itself to that sort of work, which is a testament to the whole vision of the whole team.
Yeah, I remember from the get-go, because I actually did get to work on the pilot, was that the first note we were told was that, and Chris reiterated this when we started doing the spotting sessions, which is essentially when the director, showrunners, editors kind of all powwow with us in a phone call or come in person or a Zoom meeting, and they kind of tell us their creative vision. And the number one thing was, we want chaos. We want people to turn this off. We want it to be uncomfortable. We want to make this anxious. And having worked in a kitchen, kitchens myself in the past life, they really kind of hit that nail on the head in terms of creating that tension, that constant sound that's just infuriating, and that, that pressure cooker that's on of the tickets going and the sizzling, and you can't even feel the heat that's actually in the kitchen, the grease that's all on you, but you could get so close to feeling that. And then obviously all the other drama that's going on, the shouting that's constantly in the infighting, the over talking, which is very real, especially if you're in a disorganized kitchen of sorts. So it was kind of cathartic in a way to be able to work on something like that. And I think they really did their time in studying up. I believe his sister actually is a chef at a pretty famous restaurant, if I can recall correctly.
Yeah.
So that, the concept of time, and just really trying to push things as much as we can. And they really love the music in the show in terms of how they choose that. So constantly pushing that up, and Major could probably attest to this, how much that they'd have multiple tracks sometimes playing. Like one would be a diegetic, meaning that it was coming from like a boombox or something, or a car, something in the room, like realistically, while also having soundtrack, and maybe going between the two and actually having multiple tracks going on at the same time. Like one would be score or soundtrack, and the other would be that little speaker in the corner coming from the washing area. And he's like, how do I make this work? He's like, oh yeah, just that's how it sounds like. And he's like, okay, shit, this is really hard. Like,
but I guess as well, like, it's amazing as well, like when you do work on something that kind of blows up or has a certain feel to it, it's just like, I don't know, it's very hard to, I guess, sort of put into feelings, like knowing that people are enjoying it and are loving it. I think it's like, it's one of those shows that's kind of hit at the right time, like Ted Lasso did all those years ago, like during the pandemic. It came out, it was like a nice little feel good pick me up for people.
Yeah, that's true.
Whilst this feels different in terms of, I don't know, it just has that sort of, I guess, like, because it has that like sort of punk vibe to it in terms of just how it sort of moves along and how it feels sort of like aggressive in your face one moment and then really heartfelt another. And you kind of enjoy each character. They're so well written. It's so well acted as well that you can't help but not like everybody.
Yeah, and it's those quiet moments and those reflective moments that make the chaos work, and vice versa. Like you can't have one without the other. You can't go to Copenhagen with Marcus and have it feel like it felt without having 2 episodes of chaos before it. Being able to establish that pressure cooker of the kitchen and then go away from it. It's really, they mapped it out really well, because those having, season 2, episode 7, Richie's episode, which my favorite episode of the series, where he finds his purpose, Forks, having that right after the just insane Fish's Christmas episode is I think very intentional, but just having that breath after the fact, after that flashback, those sorts of things I think are really what makes this special and feel fresh.
Yeah, and
a loud part is worthless without there being a quiet part around it. Otherwise, it just feels like just loud from start to finish. People would just eventually get accustomed to it, or just or tune it out, or maybe turn it off if it's too stressful. So these guys were able to really masterfully, I think, balance those 2 poles, which I think is really necessary for great drama, and they pulled it off.
Yeah, I think something very much to be said about using dynamics. And I think while the initial directive was loud, loud, loud all the time, and sure, we might have some more intimate scenes, we had to kind of demonstrate why there was an importance to have dynamics, to make those, while they might be talking, like Sydney and Carr might be talking in the kitchen, and that would normally be very loud. Let's push it down a little bit in terms of all the background noise and all the things that are going on, so that when the loud part hits, they hit more. Kind of like, we almost likened it to like how like a Pixies song, right? The loud, sort of soft, loud, soft, or loud, soft, loud is kind of like their modus operandi in terms of how they compose. And so I think when we put it like that, they were able to understand it more, so that those loud parts really, really hit, those design sequences where it was just boom, 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 one thing after the other. And then we'd have a nice intimate conversation, because if it was all up here, it would be nuts. But then also kudos to Major in that he really made sure, and Evan as well, to making sure the dialogue was always front and center and cohesion. It wasn't trailing off, because there is a style, especially with certain, TV shows or films, to kind of really let that dialogue be more and more intimate. There's the lack of stage whispering, but real whispering. And when you're listening at home, you really end up reaching for that remote to turn up and down the volume, and it could be not so much fun for viewers, because all of a sudden the sound effects or the music comes in, it's just boom, or a shouting sequence comes in. And so I think Major really wanted to be like, we want to keep it intimate, but we also want to make sure that like people aren't constantly going up and down on their remotes. Let's make sure that this is listenable as possible for everyone.
Yeah, if you reach for your remote, I've failed. So I try and really, when we say loud moments and quiet moments, I'm thinking more in terms of sonic density rather than actual volume. If I'm trying to convey loudness, the last thing I reach for is actual volume. So, when people are whispering in an intimate moment, actual level wise, it's pretty close to 9 people screaming in the kitchen, because otherwise it's unlistenable in a home environment. You don't want to be turning down the volume, turning up the volume, trying to hear it, putting the subtitles on. 58% of people watch television with subtitles on now, and I think that stinks. I think that's an industry-wide problem that people like me have failed. So I actively fight against that. Dialogue forward almost always, making sure we can hear every little bit, which is, you need people to be on board with that. You need good source material from Scott. You need Evan to clean it up properly, and you need a showrunner to be on board with, hey, maybe you can't have this section as actually loud as you want, because it's going to annoy people. And
yeah, I mean, there's a thing where, sometimes these people who've been working on these shows for a while, they get so accustomed to hearing the dialogue that they don't even notice how much louder everything else is getting around them. And they just keep wanting you to turn up everything. It's just sort of a natural human thing. They know what the actor is saying. Oh, I know this line in their head. They're not really thinking this consciously, but they start making it. And it's sort of part of your job, I think, to pull back and say, well, I'm watching this as a first-time person. You have to try and do that. If somebody's never seen it before, it is difficult, even for, and we haven't been working on it for as long as they have, but it is, every so often you have to take yourself out of it and just watch it as if you were somebody who'd never seen it before. And I find that, really weird. I've thought about this a lot, like cleaning up just even the start of a actor's sentence. And it could be something really simple, like their mouth noises or something that happens outside. That's where the software comes into play. Scrubbing that area around that really helps with to me, the legibility of the entire line. Psychologically, the way people are, it's like starts and beginnings of sentences and the ends of sentences that really needs TLC in a way. And in the case of the bear, they're all in the kitchen. If I can get rid of a pot smashing down and right at the end of the sale of a line, like an actor selling a line at the very end, that's where it is. And right there's just a bang or something. That's sort of like mission 1 for me, is to try to figure out if I can get rid of that. Because then we'll take that and we'll put that somewhere else. There's going to be less banging in that show. There's always going to be stuff happening, but you sort of have to figure out, where you're going to put it. So it's not just the fact that it's chaos. It's got to be controlled chaos. You have to decide. We have to all decide collectively, no, it's going to be chaotic here, and here it's not going to be chaotic. And if we want it not to be chaotic here, we have to really work hard at getting rid of all the stuff that's in there to make it feel as quiet and sort of legible as possible, as clear as possible. And then maybe the louder stuff can play a little better that way.
Yeah, it's like we even think about, what was it, episode 2 of this last season, where they're doing all the construction, and they purposely had guys on set with sledgehammers and regular hammers just banging away, and that's cooked into production sound, and they were from the get-go, we want to hear that. And so our job was, Evan's job was first is like, okay, so you don't want me to really clean that up, you want me to kind of keep it as much as possible, but still making it intelligible, and kind of being a little bit choosy about some of those he might get rid of, or some of those he might attenuate, and same as Major. And then my job as sound designer is being like, well, every single one of those, I'm going to layer with other effects too. So if that's a sledgehammer, I'm going to put in a bigger sounding sledgehammer. And then I'm going to put all the other, construction sounds from, band saws and people yelling in the background, like guys just doing construction and just getting all frustrated with each other and
John,
things like that.
You? Oh, we got an email from a random dude that was really mad. That was really mad that you put the wrong tool in the background of episode, I think 2. He gave me like a time code. He's like, that's actually this kind of tool that's for automotive use, and it wouldn't guy.
And that was this guy's takeaway. This is guy's takeaway from watching the whole season of The Bear. This was his one takeaway, is he used the wrong air-powered something that was passed around here. We just all got just a kick out of it.
Good.
Oh man, that's so funny. I have to see that.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
But that scene is really that's a real good example, because that was crazy, and trying to navigate around all of that pandemonium but still make every single line legible, audible, I think that was very, very hard to do, because they were literally smashing stuff while these guys are talking. And so Sydney has a line, and she says a great line. I'm going to go see my whatever it was, my dad, have dinner with my dad, which is a very important thing for later in the show. and I couldn't really hear her, and I had to pull together some other syllables from other takes. And I think we got a little ADR in there. I
Her
can't
saying
remember how.
specifically that it was her mom's birthday. We had to pull that out, which
Right,
was
that's right. Okay, thank
a
you. And
significant plot point.
how much ADR? There was some ADR in that scene, right? It wasn't all.
It was like a couple lines. We had originally queued a lot, and they're like, "Nah, we didn't."
Which was very different than season one, where there was pretty much no ADR, if I recall correctly. Evan and Major, right?
They added stuff. They wanted, there's a lot of that kind of stuff. There's two kinds of ADR. There's ADR where you really just need to fix, like, so, Sydney saying it's my mom's birthday, and you can't hear it. It's just to come in and watch what she's doing and replicate it. That's the part that's technically pretty difficult. The stuff that's a lot easier is when you have actors, you don't even maybe see them on screen. You don't see their lips anyway, and they're just yelling something that they want to add to the scene. Like in this case, a lot of yes chefs, a lot of behinds, a lot of stuff like that, kitchen lingo. But that is, that stuff is spread throughout that first season, and that's a lot of what counts for ADR lines in that show. But as far as corrective stuff, I don't think there was very much at all, right?
Yeah, I guess that's what I meant more, was that in terms of what they would call technical ADR, like,
yeah, very little.
we want to clean this up.
In terms of sort of dissecting answers and whatnot, I think going to Major's point about how many people watch shows with subtitles, I am one of those people who watches subtitles. I think sometimes you realize how certain things can be quite loud and then dialogue scenes are quite low. So then you're sort of playing around with the volume quite a lot. And so one moment you'll be like just about hearing what they say. And then the next moment your ears are bleeding because of like the explosion that's just come through your speakers. And you're like, wow, I didn't realize it was that loud. But I guess, as you said as well, like it's another thing that people are like they get used to how things sound in the suites, and maybe it's just not used to it as as for audience members and whatnot.
Yeah. I mean, and it's being aware of it. I mean, I hope you didn't have that experience on the Bear, but I'm sorry if you did. Just because of the sheer size of the room I work in, not because I want to mix it in a large room, but because sometimes I have to fit 15 people in here to review it. So it's basically a small movie theater. So if you are not consciously fighting against the, hey, I got great dynamic range, I can really like make it boom, and which sounds great in here, and you're like ready for it, but you have to be aware of 72% of streaming content is still consumed on a television. So you have to be prepared for that, which means, maybe not so much low end that's going to eat up your dynamic range. Just don't go from whispering to explosions, because that just annoys people. I mean, there's shows on today, and I think a lot of it is, there are a lot of small reasons that add up to a big problem, but I think one of the big reasons is a lot of film mixers are getting into prestige television now, and they're used to mixing on their stage for film, for a theater, which is great, and they get the showrunners all excited, and then when it plays on television, it's almost unwatchable because of how dynamic it is. Look, if it's an action show, yeah, you can have a little more dynamic range, but just, a couple people talking about in a restaurant doesn't have to be all over the place.
I also think there's a trend with actors. It's not me thinking it. It is that they tend to talk lower and lower. There's a lot more whispering. I think actors get confident that I'll have a mic right here, so I can just come. And then eventually it just becomes harder and harder to dig out what they're saying.
Yeah.
And it is funny. I don't know if you guys ever watch older movies or not, but I watched them quite a bit, and actors really projected not that long ago. They just always felt like they had to get out there and sort of project what they were saying.
Or you can tell if an actor's had theater training, because they know how to project, they know how to stage whisper, or somebody that's only ever done films, and then they act quite. So I mean, there's definitely some actors, not so much on this show, but on other shows where I'm alone in my room yelling, "Act louder," and they just loud.
I worked on something recently where one of the actors was so soft spoken, and also there wasn't as good a recordist as Scott was on the Bear, but you have the combination of a noisy exterior and a very quiet actor, so that even the lav that this actor had a lot of background noise on it, and you're trying to dig this whisper out of this noise, and it's just very, very difficult. And then you've got a room full of people who know what this actor is saying, but they want to hear, oh, where's the car buys, and can we get the background music a little bit louder, and can we get this? And all of a sudden that actor is lost. It's very difficult. So these things are all converging. They're all this sort of like different problems that cause the same problem. I guess there's different issues that cause the same problem, right?
Yeah, I would never say. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go
But I
ahead.
was just going to jump on what you're saying, what Major's saying too, is, it's not necessarily because we actually get this question. It's probably the most common question that are asked by regular everyday people. I remember I was snowboarding up in Vermont and someone asked me what I was doing for work. And I told them I work in film and TV doing sound. And they said, I have one note, for you guys in general is that sometimes you can't hear the dialogue and I'm having to reach for the remote. And I said, you know what? A lot of that is like we wish we could control when we go on our, nerdy little sound forums. We all kind of feel that way on the post-production sound side. And there's been a trend, I would say, in the last 10, 20 years for sure that we want the whispering, the more intimate scenes to be more intimate. There's less of that stage whispering style, the need to project. We're going to go really try to be quiet and soft and like do it like as if they were actually talking 2 feet away from each other, which most people, even when they're whispering, don't really talk like that either. And so it's a stylistic thing that's coming from the direction as well as the acting and just kind of like how things like, music changes with style. And that's how sound in terms of acting has changed. And then we have to try to still make that fit into the actual mix without making sure that we're losing the intimacy. And so I think that's kind of where the crux of the problem lies. And it's the same thing with sound effects too. It's, getting back to like, how this is actually going to play on a small TV screen? How's it going to play on a phone? And, the good thing with Major and Evan and myself is that we've all done also a lot of documentary work. I've also done a good amount of commercial work where we're always thinking like this is not an action movie. Like dialogue is king. We want to make sure this is very clear and intelligible the whole way through. So, how is this going to play on a small iPhone? It's, half people are going to listen to on an iPhone, iPad. It's flat panel TV with no sound bar at all. And so when you could think more like that and think about how the medium is going to be listened to, it kind of puts us at an advantage. And so when I'm doing sound design, for example, and we have some big like boom kind of sound, a lot of editors or, in the edit and initially they might be like, oh, we want that really deep subwoofer kind of boom that's you hear in the theater and it sounds awesome. But when you play it on TV, you can't even hear it because the cutoff frequency, like the TV can't reproduce sound that low. The phone can't produce sound that low. You would really need either headphones or some big speakers. And so you have to think about how do I layer that with other sounds and other frequency ranges to make sure that you hear that punch, that top end. It's like, same thing with like a music mix, it's like that 808 that's in a lot of modern day music that's giving that bass. It's like you still need some punch on top for that to come through on anything but headphones or speakers. So it's, we're all kind of fighting that how do you make this play on multiple mediums? How do you make it sound level? How do you create those big moments and those and those smaller moments using dynamics? So it's very much, we're kind of on this new frontier that we've all kind of, I feel like have gotten to a pretty good place of in the last 5-10 years or so, but it's, it's taken a while and we're still all learning how to get this better and better.
I feel like we've slightly tangented a little bit, but it's all really fascinating to hear because there's so much, you forget how important sound can be in a show. Just because you don't see it. And as audience members, you're like, oh my gosh, like you do pick up on these things. And I think it's fascinating to hear from experts themselves about how it's changing and how it can be improved. But to go back to the show, how did the project come about for you guys and what made you want to take it on?
I had worked with Josh Sr., who's an executive producer on a couple of shows, and tangentially Chris Storr, the co-creator, co-showrunner. He was a director on and a producer on Rami, another series I do. And I had worked with Evan and John on both of those. So after I wasn't able to do the pilot because of a schedule, but they were able to come back to me after I picked up the series. And John was on the pilot, so he was a great fit. And, Evan's my go-to as my favorite dialogue editor. So just kind of came together. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to have also been on the pilot and to kind of get into the front door of all of this too. And it was very funny because if you saw the first episode of season 1, it's so different than the rest of it. There's all these concepts of, that were introduced that kind of didn't end up really playing so much into the season. The arcade game itself was supposed to take on a life of its own, the Ball Breaker video game. And that kind of just became like a little just side thing. It wasn't even a side plot, but one of the first directions I had on the pilot episode was we want to create original arcade sounds that sound kind of like 80s, but more angular and dissonant and noisy and like from scratch. And so I took like all these guitar pedals and just, went to town and just recorded a bunch of stuff and then chopped it up and sampled it and create a whole sample library of stuff that we got used a little bit in some of those kind of like, zoom in shots of the arcade game in the first season and some of these more kind of like noisier kind of punch elements. But then other than that, it pretty much just played in the background. Like generally, pretty much through all season one, there was just arcade game sound going that they just wanted to be like, oh, we're in the beef. So that's how I got involved. And yeah, having worked with Major and Evan a bunch over the years, it's good fit always. And we always have a great time working together and just learning from each other too. Major is just, getting to work with him as a supervising sound editor, re-recording mixer. It's just always a treat to be able to see how what we're doing, on this in our edit rooms and how that's actually translating to the stage and how it's translating to the mix and how he's able to take that too and bring his creativity and his ideas to it. Like I could think of the car jump from season the second season where Richie's singing God, what was the song? Was it Taylor Swift? Yeah, it was a Taylor Swift song and he's super happy. I think it was the Forks episode, right? He's super stoked on how everything's going in his life. 7. Yeah, and he just at one point just jumps his car over some like little bump thing and it goes flying in midair. And I created all this stuff like the vroom and whooshes and, the hits of the car and then, everything in midair is still kind of going a little bit. And then boom, the car smacks down on the ground and we have, metal sounds and tire sounds and big thumps and zoom off and whooshes. And Major's like, check this out. What if I just chop it off right at the middle of when he hits the midair, so it's just like kind of like pregnant pause there, and it was like such a smart creative idea, and being able to watch him kind of
most of my ideas are muting some of your stuff. But no, I mean I like working like that because John gives 150%, and I have the material to then like maybe not feature sound design at this point, or when it is time to just go nuts, the material is there, which is a great way to work. I would much rather have a few elements to maybe tone down than like, hey, let's cut some more because I don't have time for that. So no, John's really good at giving me all of the things, and then it's my job to just with dialogue too, and music is just I play traffic cop depending on what the scene what the moment needs.
Yeah, and I think you always say that right in terms of like we have 3 elements going: dialogue, music, and effects potentially at any time, and kind of picking the 2 that's going to stick out. Dialogue, if there's dialogue going, is usually going to be number 1, but kind of making all 3 pop at once is always going to be the most difficult thing because it's going to be too distracting. And as far as what we're doing with sound design, especially with season 2, they definitely felt more trusting and giving us more creative license. And Major's always giving creative license to really go to town and experiment and try new things. We'd have so many of these panic attacks and ramp up moments and cutty montage stuff where there's just a million sounds coming at you and we have to make it flow and there's a music track going and we want to make it kind of fit in with all that. And he's just like, go to town and I'll peel back from there and I'll massage it in further. And I always try to pre-mix it to be like, what if this was going to be like a sound design, soundtrack, right? Like how would this work if we just wanted to hear sound design, and then fit it into the mix. But then Major will be like, okay, here's the point where I'm going to actually massage it further. I'm going to mute out these things. This sounds awesome, but we want to make this more thinned out, or they want to try something else, so it's a lot of fun. It's awesome getting to work on a show like this because we really get to do a lot more stuff than we would on maybe another show or another movie that might be a little bit more conventional in a way.
On the Bear, we all worked on the same hallway basically. We're all here, and so kind of fun for me to work on the dialogue, which is completely devoid of any other external added components because that's how you really need to work on it to make sure you have it right. And then go down the hall to John and see what he's adding to it, and then go further down the hall to Major, and you'd be listening to the sort of the semi-finished product before the everybody came to, the actual showrunner came to look at it, but you'd just be watching the evolution of this thing grow in a scene, and it was really interesting to watch, like to watch music being added to something that you had worked on for a long time as quiet, kind of very, very, or whatever else got added. It's very interesting, really fun to do.
Yeah, there's really something to be said, and I know this is obviously a little bit harder post-COVID or, since COVID and, even before COVID when there was a lot more work from home for sound editors. But having like people that you work with and work with on a consistent basis, and being in the same space as them and being able to bounce ideas off and see, how this is working in the mix, getting that real-time feedback and collaboration, and just having like good personalities that work well with each other. It really is something to be said that like with every project that you do, with every episode that you do, it just keeps on getting better and better, and that you learn from each other, and that you see, oh, I did this last year. Like, wow, if I would have approached it this year, I would have done it totally different. And just having that ability to be like, hey, Mage, Evan, can you guys check out this scene? Like, what do you think? Like, what are your ears telling you? Because I'm in my own silo in some ways, and they're in others, and they could be like, oh, I would actually try this idea. And it's really cool to be able to have that.
Like with COVID, when you're all away from one another, it becomes probably infinitely harder because you don't have someone on the other end next door to you to say, oh, just have a look at this, or what do you think of this? And like, don't get me wrong, like working from home is like a nice little perk sometimes, but when you're in such a big collaborative effort, I think sometimes like it can be lost in translation in terms of like what you're sending and what you're writing. But then also it's the accessibility of one another is kind of slightly harder. We do it over Zoom, and then there's like internet problems or whatever that might strike as well.
You can't do the pop-in, you can't do the group lunch. I mean, it's a team sport, so when everybody's at their own house, it's just you lose something, It's those intangibles that just stink with work from home. It's nice sometimes, and it's nice to have the flexibility, but I like people around. Helps with collaboration.
Yeah.
And the same with, when you do reviews with clients, when have we got this thing technologically figured out? Sure, we can do all kinds of stuff like that. You can do many. It's pretty evolved now. It works pretty efficiently. You can have anybody gets on and they can hear it in sync and sounds good, and they can listen to it, but you don't have any control over what they're listening on. You don't have any control over their environment where they're listening to it. You don't have any, it's very awkward to have these interactions back and forth where they want to do so. Sometimes just people's body language is important in figuring out what they're liking and not liking. So I couldn't wait to get back to being in a real environment. The client took a while for the clients to start filtering back in, but they are. I'm much happier with it. But the remote stuff does help because you also can get people to join in. They would not fly across the country to do something, and so they still don't have to. But now they can drop in on something, and maybe some people are here, some people are in LA, and that kind of works out great too.
Oh, no, I'm saying it's a nice feature to be able to have that option of like, you might be working on something and you want some, hey, come hop on this call, like let's figure out something quick, and to be able to do that in real time before the actual final mix, when they're going to come in and really sit down and nitty gritty. But yes, having people in person is so much different than the Zoom, or Evercast or Clear, any type of remote kind of feedback option, because you get that nonverbal feedback, you get that kind of communication, you get that willingness to experiment, and you get to immediately make those changes while they're talking. You're like, cool, I just did exactly what you were about to say. Let's play it back right now. So yeah, it's nice that it's kind of going back that way, and just the camaraderie of having people together in a room working together, whether it's on the mix stage for the final mix or it's in the edit stage, I think is really key to making the best product possible.
I think as well, John, you touched upon this a little bit earlier and talking about how Major comes into this as well. But in the show, there is a lot of chaos, and one of the themes is very much every second counts. So where do you begin with the sound design, and are there sound cues already written in the script? I know we've mentioned as well that there are sort of like the show has been designed for more of a sound-based show.
Yeah, conceptually, the Every Second Counts was something they very much said with season 2. And, with both season 1, season 2, the use of clocks as a motif was very important. And being a musician, actually all three of us are musicians, and pretty much any post-production sound guy or sound person is a musician too. Every single one of us played guitar in the band at some point. We all have a pretty good sense of rhythm, and so one thing, because music is so important to the show and they really love their choices, is to play into that. So if we have a clock ticking while this Pearl Jam or REM song's going, it's like, I'm going to find where that BPM is, and actually maybe that clock tick's not going to be on the second, but it's going to be close enough and it's going to fit in rhythmically with it. So doing that, using different types of rhythmic elements. So they might be clocks, they might be kitchen sounds and whatever. They might be more abstract types of sounds, but trying to do that in a way that's just like fitting in with the music, making something that's rhythmic, like as if you're a drummer in a way, I think is really key to trying to keep it pushing forward. As far as how we kind of start the episode, when we get the turnover or when we get the elements from the editing team, there's always going to be some sound effects that they added. And then there's some what's called production sound effects, or a production sound that has some of the sound cooked in, right? Like, so in one of those examples that we mentioned earlier, where the construction was happening in the beginning of episode 2 of season 2, where the hammers were going on. And so we kind of look for that as kind of like a little bit of a roadmap, and we try to use as much as we can from them. And sometimes they fill it out more, and sometimes it's just like, this is a kitchen, we're going to use that same kitchen sound, just general stereo sound, and we really end up filling it out there. For a lot of the more designy stuff, they kind of really trust us to go for it. So when we look at, like, for example, like 206, sorry, I'm calling it 206 and whatever. Is that Fishes is episode 6 of 2, correct?
Yeah.
Correct. This was a very big episode for them, not only because of what the writing and the acting and the guest stars that they had on it, but they really wanted to convey this chaos. And one of those motifs was these egg timers. And they said, okay, well, we want the egg timers going off in the back. And we had to actually, choose some different egg timer sounds. And I, spent a bunch of time digging out some egg timers, and then ones that are going to play diegetically, meaning that they're supposed to actually sound like real egg timers coming from a room that's either distant or close, and so I'd futz them, meaning like I'd make them try to sound not like a close mic egg timer, but EQ them and verb them and, make them sound a little bit slightly distorted, like they were recorded on set. And then the other ones that were like these zoom ramps into, like, you see this egg timer covered in sauce that's going off while, his mom's screaming her head off about, one of the dishes not being taken out on time. And they're like, well, we want those to go off and zoom, but with other elements. And so you have to like treat them each differently, as if they're like these designy kind of like things. So that would be a great example of, using time in a very literal sense. But then always, throughout, like, I have all these design parts, and, I'm sure Major could speak to this too, is where we would have, like, there would be like this kind of like overall, moment, the sequence. It could have been 30 seconds. It could be a few minutes even, where it's just kind of like going. And we want to actually use kind of like a bass line, like kind of like chugga, chugga, chugga type of thing that's moving and moving and moving while the other elements are coming in, while saucepan, an oven close, a fire turning on the oven, the boiler going, ding from the tickets being up, a printer sound, and just playing with all that. And yeah, I think that's kind of the best way to say it. And, my favorite part of doing this was like those types of moments, those longer sequences, like in episode 3 of season 2, when, was it Sydney's, I'm trying to remember, Mage, what is that part of season? So Sydney's like little journey, her food journey. There's this really good music cue going on. It's like a, R&B track, kind of like Motown soul kind of thing going on, but it's got this boom, 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 boom. And so it was very cutty, going from train sounds to, cars passing, to being in one kitchen to the next, to, close-up shots of like plating something, to a sizzle, to a burn, and just like really just making each one of those pop, and then adding other elements and doing the Foley sounds that sometimes, I would do myself versus, our Foley studio as well, and getting that to work rhythmically with the song. And so that was probably one of the more funner moments. Same as like Richie's kind of, when Richie takes over in episode 10 of season 2, and he just like, he takes over as the expo, which is the person who's kind of calling the shots in the back of the kitchen, saying like, okay, I need 4 burgers and 3 fries, whatever it might be. And, it was a very fast cutting montage sequence. And so really just making like all those sounds pop, and just, I think that's always the most fun, because it's like you want them to each cut through and be differentiated from each other, and not just be a singular mono sound of like, here's a pan, here's a sizzle. It's like something that's another element in the stereo or surround field that's also moving it forward. And then those abstract sequences or abstract sounds. So like there would be the digital clock ramps as well, because they had that digital clock with the countdown going for 5 minutes. So just kind of trying to intertwine all those, and, just really putting the pressure cooker up, no pun intended.
I think as well, like when you have so much going on sound wise, I just think there's, I guess, like on top of those sort of quiet chaos moments, there are quieter moments. And those quieter moments are earned in a way, I would say, like as an audience member, because you have to go even though you do have that pressure cooker, then you go to those quieter moments where you have the actors shine in terms of how they perform and how they're sort of invoking the dialogue. And you can see that. I think a good one is like the episode 2 of season 1, where they have to go get they got an issue with the court for the walls, and you can see Richie always kind of goes a bit OTT, but then when he's by himself with Sydney, he kind of just calms and changes the way that he's sort of acting and behaving and emoting as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Those counterbalancing the chaos with those quiet moments that's definitely their secret weapon for sure.
And
Yeah, I mean, the one I always think about when it gets to this stuff is the last episode of the first season where Carmi does that long monologue, because that's him and nothing else but him, and it's 7 minutes of him sort of encapsulating the whole season in a way. And you finally sort of figure out his origin story, and that's about as quiet and minimal as you could get, and yet that ends up being one of the harder things for me to work on, weirdly, because you really want that to be impactful, and there's no place to hide, so there's no distracting pots or anything to hide any kind of thing I'm doing with what is his voice, whatever kind of noise is happening, whatever's happening in the background of the church. And I think those are incredibly effective for to sell, like we were talking about earlier, to make the other stuff sound as exciting as it does. But to have those kinds of scenes, to watch a guy like that show off his chops, like that kind of monologue, to do that is just an incredible feat. I heard Jeremy talking on a podcast himself about it, and he just said he carried that monologue around with him for the whole season. Like they sort of kept writing it, sort of polishing it, and he kept thinking about it. That's just an incredible moment, I think. But it's so minimal, right? Minimal in terms of everything. It's the exact opposite of the rest of the season, and that's what makes it so great.
In terms of like, because you've got moments where you have those quiet moments like you just said about the monologue, but then you could also have the craziness or something like this episode before, whilst they're in the kitchen and everything's sort of going to pot. In terms of like how you guys work, like how do you make sure that you guys don't get on top of one another in terms of creating scenes so that dialogue's not lost, but then also the environment, the sound environment's not lost as well?
Yeah, I mean that's mostly my job there as traffic cop to make sure that, like, because John will give me 100% of everything. There'll be 9 layers of church backgrounds, and it's my job to be like, hey, it's not about that right now. He has to give them to me because it might be about that, but that's, as mixer and supervisor, it's kind of figuring out what element is carrying it here. Is it the screaming? Is it do we need car buys outside when everyone's screaming? Probably not. That sort of thing, like prioritizing what you're going to hear, and what it's always in service of the story. That's, we can have cool sound design, we can have awesome stuff happening, but if it's not helping the story, it goes. You have to be a little bit brutal about it, which is tough sometimes, because you're like, oh, this is really cool, this sound I did, it's got this off-screen thing, and it's like it's not serving the story, so it's gone. It's not helping immerse ourselves in the world. It's actually more distracting than anything. So it's all about kind of seeing the big picture, because what happens is John is doing his thing and making sure everything sounds great, and the world is built. Evan's doing his thing, making it's everybody's doing 100%. The music department, it's 100%. They're trying to make everything work within their world. So it's up to me to figure out, okay, this scene needs to be, it's music and dialogue handing off back and forth to each other, and then effects takes a back seat. Or, the dialogue isn't that important in this section. It's going to be music and effects here, so mapping that out both on a moment-to-moment basis, a scene-wide basis, and then even, a season-wide, episode-wide, figuring out those things of like, hey, this is the arc of this episode in terms of craziness, in terms of, it's going to be a very music forward episode because it's this particular thing. So figuring all of that out, kind of zooming out and really getting a grasp of it is hopefully what my job is, and hopefully I did it okay.
Oh, you certainly did. I think you did it great, and I think just kind of
Thanks,
tailing on what you said, of course, just kind of jumping on what you said too, is that it's a lot of it is kind of like figuring out those holes, at least from the sound design perspective. So and I thank Major for the compliments of really trying to like say like how would this play if it was just if like the sound design is going to be a big moment there, and I try to always give it my all in terms of providing options for the mix stage, because sometimes they might not want this sound or they might want certain layers and not others, but also trying to like make like a very cool moment that maybe, you know, they didn't think about it as a cool moment, but hey, I'm hearing something very cool. Let's try it out. Let's experiment. But also kind of the way that I think about sound design, and I get that a lot from having done commercial mixing and, you know, mixing myself, and then also getting to collaborate with someone like Majors, being like, where are those holes? Where are those moments to shine? And when you start really thinking about it from the mix perspective, that's where you could really start putting your attention towards those moments. And that coupling with the spotting sessions where we get to talk to our editors like Joanna and Adam, and we get to talk to Christopher and Josh, who are showrunners, about what their vision is and where they really want to, you know, push it. And then we could kind of like feed them some ideas for those moments, you know, like, hey, like what if we did this over here, where the end of that scene kind of tails off and there's this pregnant pause. It's like, how do we ramp that? Like, or where can we push the music? You know, like one thing we tried, I think, in that, was it episode 10 of season 2, right? Where right before Richie takes over as the expo, they had one music cue that was like kind of Sydney panicking, you know, not knowing what to do. She's overwhelmed by all the tickets coming in. It's the opening, you know, night, and Richie comes in and he's like about to take over, and he kind of like is paralyzed for a second too, and it's kind of like all of a sudden like it goes into his head, like, you know, he's like you know, like where you almost like would lose consciousness or faint, and then it hits off with that Pearl Jam song where it just boom right in there. And initially they had it was that the music cue goes right from the other, and there's not this kind of like moment necessarily where we really have a lot of space for us to kind of like lose it with Richie. And so we made a suggestion of saying, what if we kind of chopped off, you know, the music here and kind of like really went into Richie's head a bit more, tailed off the music on that first cue, just and we're just like with Richie, like everything's overwhelmed, it gets blurry in a way, you know, and then all of a sudden that Pearl Jam song comes in, it's just like wham, and then like Richie just goes into beast mode. And so being able to collaborate with everyone in that sense and really think about it from the mix perspective, think about it from the narrative perspective, how this creates more drama and suspense, I think is really you know, what makes the difference between sound design and mixing versus creating a soundtrack altogether and really making sound a part of the story.
I think as well, like having those ideas of not having stuff crowded out, but having everything sort of work in tandem with one another. But you're right with Major being the traffic cop stopping people in his role. I bet he absolutely relishes that and loves doing it.
I love muting things. It's the best.
Just sort of like just there playing around with it all. But I think as well, like on top of that, it's like what is right for the scene, how we're going to serve the scene. And it's great that we can flex our creative sound muscles and whatnot. But if it doesn't work, then, you know, we don't want to take anybody out of the scene. But you guys mentioned as well talking to other departments and talking to editors, and whilst they work, they'll create like a temp sound design track when they're editing, just so that they can play something along. How involved are you guys in what they sort of put forward in these temp tracks? And then do you ever take ideas from them, or do you sort of look at it and be like, okay, cool, we're just gonna ignore what they've done and put in our stuff because I know it's gonna sound better?
No, I mean, it's we occasionally feed them sounds, but because of the pace of this, I mean, they work very quickly. The whole pace of post-production is very quickly, so it's not, you know, there's not a lot of time for like, hey, here's a temp version of this, why don't you guys temp this scene out, and then we're gonna send it to, like, there's just no time for that. So sometimes they're like, hey, do you have this sound of, you know, a 90s cargo van like falling off a cliff? Like, oh yeah, I got that, let me send it to you. No, that's not in this show, but you know, that sort of thing. Like, oh hey, but they have a lot of stuff they've reused now from last season, and just like that they can temp in. And they, because of, again, the way that the picture and the sound work together in this, and it's a rhythmic thing, and the music and everything's working together, they map it out pretty well with their temp sounds. We'll replace a lot, if not all of it, with our sounds or whatever, but a lot of the, you know, the structure's there, the sketch of it is there, and then we pitch things and we add our own moments, but a lot of it is there because it has to be there at the picture edit stage, like, you know, those zoom ramps and that sort of stuff. Like, there is a sound there, not necessarily the sound, but it's and then, you know, the balance of, oh, this is a music montage and like the dialogue really isn't important here, like that sort of stuff they will have sketched out. And more often than not, that's what they want, and that's what I give them. Occasionally I'll fight against something and be like, oh, hey, actually in this section it should be the other way, and because of this, and we go back and forth because it's a collaboration. But yeah, they do a really good job of saying like, hey, this is the vision, and then we go to town.
It's great that we've got to work with them now on 2 seasons, and you know, we have a good collaborative relationship with them and with Josh and Christopher, that, you know, with every passing episode there is a more of a, you know, camaraderie, more of a trust, more of a way that we could all kind of work together on this. So, you know, for example, in season 1, they probably put more of a roadmap in terms of, or we would try to use more of their sound effects or their production sound that they would put in, and really make sure that that was in there, and then layer on top of that. Whereas this season they had, I feel like they're like, it came out great last season. Like, like, for this scene, like, we know that you guys are going to nail it. I'm just putting literally just a stereo background of a kitchen in here, and we know that you're just going to hit it all. And so they would have the roadmap still, but they would be like, you guys go for it. So I think that's part of the collaborative process, is you build the trust with the people that you work with to kind of go from there. But you always have to treat what they're doing, what they're playing with in the edit, as, you know, that is the creative vision that they had, and we could pitch them on ideas, especially during those spotting sessions. But especially with TV, when you only have about a week to edit and a few days to mix, you know, we have to pick our battles, and we have to choose where we could really kind of, hey, let's pitch them on this idea, but otherwise kind of let's take what they have as an idea and make it sound like what we do as professionals. Let's make it sound as best as possible, as cool as possible, and go from there, and just kind of take their lead. And always know that, you know, it's the one thing I think that's always hard as a sound designer, is that we want to put all of our creative instincts into it and put our all and our passion into it. And we have to kind of remember that this isn't our own little album. This isn't our own little movie. We are serving the purpose of the story, and we are serving, you know, we want to make sure that the people involved, their ideas are coming first and foremost. So I think it's kind of figuring out where we can do that, how we can add, how we can build upon that. And, you know, the only other thing to say is that there is the concept, which many sound people will refer to as demo love or temp love, that happens where if you're working in an edit on something, you know, you're working on a film, TV show, commercial, and, you know, you've heard this sound something this way, whether it could just be the levels of something, you know, because they're not mixing it for the appropriate medium yet, certain sound effect they might use, et cetera, and then they give it to the sound team, and all of a sudden they're going to hear it somewhat differently in about a week. We have to be very cognizant of that even if we think we have an idea that might be better, they've heard it a certain way and respect. So it's always following that roadmap and trying to give deference to their vision more than anything. So my first move with any of this is taking everything they gave me and cleaning it up, trying to edit it, try to use every single effect and every single sound, whether it's production sound or library sounds, and try to make that work, and then building on top of there, so that we're always putting their creative vision as at the forefront.
Yeah. And
sorry, that was very long-winded.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I think it's interesting to hear because you're editing a show. When you're editing, you obviously have a way of like how scenes are played out. But I guess then once you start building it up again with sound and adding that in, then probably you have to go back to the drawing board as an editor to maybe change how you've cut a scene, or how a scene's going to play out, or what you might need to. What you might not want to, might hold on to a shot a little bit longer than you had previously, because the sounds exuberated it a bit more as well.
Yeah, and they have a little bit of leeway on this show because we're not chasing air and everything drops at once. Like, they will occasionally make an edit change, not at our request, but, you know, once the sound's in here, we do want an extra beat here. So they'll make little picture changes along the way. Now, there aren't a ton of them because there's not a lot of time, but which is nice, because usually in TV it's just always forward. So having that flexibility is pretty great.
That's good as well. Like, they're open to that and sort of changing what needs to be changed if it's necessary. But there's, on top of that, like with the show, it's quite famous for its needle drops with how many songs are being played. And I think there's like a lot of talk, is like there's a lot of like dad rock on the show, which makes me feel quite odd, because it's like surely this is just normal rock, not dad rock. Like when did this come into play?
Yeah, it's a
But
little ouchy. It's that ouch when they describe it. It's like you're like, ouch, that stings a little.
yeah, it's like, am I like out of touch now? What's happened?
Sure. So am I.
Let me get my breath for a second there. But with like needle drops, how does that affect the way you guys work and what you want to, and how you guys create the sound design and how dialogue is inserted?
I mean, this is the part that I struggle with the most. And we butt heads is the wrong word, but we go back and forth about it because they'll play us. Almost no music is diegetic in the show. Almost all of it is score. So it'll be a needle drop that comes in, and then instead of when the scene starts, it comes in over a transition and it's REM and it's amazing. And then instead of, tailing off and just finishing, it'll play underneath the whole next scene or the whole next two scenes, which has taken me a little bit of time to figure out how to do that properly. I think we got there. But it's again, that balance of like, okay, how can we play this song where it doesn't interfere with anything, but also you're hearing the song, because that is important and it does propel the scene. It's another, and there's always an engine in the scene, and if there's a rock song playing, that certainly is the engine, whether it is propelling the scene or fighting against the scene. When you have Richie and Carmi having a quiet moment, and then there's like Pearl Jam playing, it's sometimes it fights against it in a very purposeful way. So it's figuring out, sometimes on the technical side, I'll duck certain frequencies to make sure, like, if there's vocals in the song, I'll duck those. So it's just, you're getting the rhythm and the sense of it, but it's not fighting against the dialogue, all that sort of thing. This is a unique show in which the showrunner and executive producer, Josh and Chris, are actually the credited music supervisors. Usually, obviously, the showrunner has massive input on the music of the show, but yeah, on the show, they are the actual music supervisors. So they start with a playlist in mind while they're writing the show. So it's very integrated into these cuts early on. So they're not just, let's slap in a Pearl Jam song. It's very much, they're cutting to these tracks. So they are part of the architecture of the show from the start.
I'm just giving Major some props, because when I watch these scenes after I've worked on them and there is a highly recognizable tune with vocals in them, I'm always impressed by how I'm still hearing everything. I just think I know that's very hard to do, because I do some mixing myself, and when you have vocals in a scene with dialogue, that's usually the thing that people try and steer
usually
away
a big
from.
no, but yeah,
right. And he managed to make that work, which is much harder than it sounds or usually is. So he great
thanks,
job.
Evan.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's as far as the needle drops from the sound design perspective, in a way it's kind of helpful because they are editing, Joanna and Adam and whoever the editor, assistant editors might be on that episode, Christopher and Josh, they're all editing to this. They're all thinking about, like, not like, oh, how do we fit this song to just kind of be as background music for this scene or as setting a mood? It's like, they're like, no, we're having these cuts, these shots, like, really change up on the transients, or like the downbeat. Transients being like if you think about a song as 1, 2, 3, 4, the quarter notes, they're really trying to make it very rhythmic. And so that kind of like sets us up in a way, for the sound design at least, to kind of play rhythmically with it. So they use that Refuse song always in both season 1 and season 2. It's a common song they use. And so, like, when we were talking about time and music and how that interrelates, when I cut that for the end of episode 1 of season 2, I have this clock. They had a temporary clock ticking thing kind of on the buildup of the song before they kind of like are like, oh man, we only have X amount of weeks to go before we have to open. I actually recut the clock, put in my own clock sound, recut it so that it was actually lined up with the song, I think on like 8th notes or something like that, and then had all the other effects going on. And so it was always trying to look for the music first to make that fit. I'd rather the sound effect be off by a couple frames and fit in musically, because that would clash more if it was clashing with the music versus being slightly out of sync with picture. And so it really just kind of is a very cool way of working. So things like that, things like the Pearl Jam song from Richie's big moment in season 2, episode 10, got it blanking because there's so many of these moments, but really trying to follow their guide with that, I think is important, and it gives us kind of a lot of fun to play with.
that's the sort of like, I guess it's like another character of the show is the music and how it always is used to play out certain situations. You know, the Taylor Swift song, I think, is a good one to show Richie's like growth as a character, because I think there's at one point he just doesn't like Taylor Swift and he's very like against getting tickets, and then you see him that's like starts singing the song, and he's like, you can tell that he's sort of digging the vibe. And also the Refuse songs that you were saying as well, being in both season 1 and 2, it kind of feels like the intro. It kind of feels like it's like the intro track of the show itself, like the unofficial one. Because whenever you hear that, it's like, okay, you know, it's time to turn on the ovens and let's get cooking.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Who hasn't had a
songs have a
private psycho moment to Taylor Swift? I mean, come on.
We've all been there. But
You
people
know,
on the
when
train
you
don't
listen
take
to
it
the
as well as when you're in a car.
My wife puts that Bear compilation on all the time in the car when we're driving, and they really do have a certain vibe together when you listen to them. There is a real aesthetic behind those. They're not randomly chosen. They're fantastic together. So that just means something emotionally too. That they just make sense the way they were, put together.
Yeah, and then that's like an art in itself as well. Like knowing that is like, I wonder if they had that song in their mind whilst they're writing scenes to then be like, actually, well, let's put this in there. I know there's a song that Adam picked from Michael Mann's Thief that he kind of heard and put it into the playlist, and it still managed to end up into the one of the episodes. So there's always, like as you said, there's always sort of meaning, and there's always like a method behind the madness of picking the songs. I'm slightly pressed for time at the moment, so I've got a few questions left. So this one goes out to John. Actually, do you know what? Screw it. Let's not. I'll worry about the time later on and face the consequences later. But there's two episodes that I would love to talk about with you guys. I would say they're quite fan favorites. They're also some of my favorite episodes, but it's episode 7 of season 1 where they open the restaurant and it's just pandemonium, and then episode 6 of season 2 where who hasn't had fun at a Christmas dinner table where you've all had your little arguments and disagreements and whatnot. As a sound team, when you're going into those sort of worlds and there is madness, chaos, shouting, talking, private moments, how do you guys go about creating the sound for those episodes?
I would say, it's funny that because those two specific episodes are probably the most collaborative between every single person involved on the show in post-production. We really looked with season 1, episode 7, when they open up the restaurant. We really did take the lead from Adam and Joanna there, from the editing team they basically literally threw the kitchen sink in their edit at us. They're like, this is every single kitchen sound happening all at once. And it was our job to kind of like, okay, how do we make these all pop? How do we make these all fit? And then layer on top of that, and Evan just being like, how do I get all this screaming to work within the confines of this episode here? And it's a continuous shot. And then Major being like, okay, somehow I have to mix this and also get this within spec of broadcast. This is going to be a little difficult. And he did a lot of creative things like, there's people talking all over the room, and he would, have like Marcus, someone, panned off to the side, but keeping his lav on the side, but the boom in the middle. So it didn't feel too disconnected, but, felt like it was slightly off screen. So it was really a very collaborative process, and same thing for Fishes. This is an episode where we had Matt Sneedcore, who is he joined us on this season as an effects editor too, and he was on that episode with us. And our supervising sound editor for this season, she was amazing, Andrea Bella, and she really kind of divvied up that work in such a great way that Matt was kind of setting a lot of the baseline of the chaos, what was going on in the background ambiances, and just the off-screen stuff, and even some of the specific cooking, and the Foley team just doing their amazing job. Alchemy Post up in I don't want to say upstate New York, I forget, I think it's Putnam County or Westchester County, but they're such an amazing team, and the New York film sound community really relies on them heavily as the premier Foley house, or one that we really love. And just the amount of shouting and just over talking that's going on that I think Evan had said in some other interviews or other podcasts, but he's also confided in us. He's like, that was probably the single hardest dialogue edit I've ever had to do, and rightfully so. I mean, that's 12 people shouting at each other all with funny quips and lines, and I mean, it's a hilarious episode too, while it's also both very dramatic and, you know, you really do see the villain origin story in a way. You know, you really see kind of the trauma that affects Carm especially, but also Sugar and, you know, the whole family, you know, and then figuring out what about those more abstract sound design moments with the egg timers and the, you know, the car smashing and the fight itself, and, you know, all these like little design ramps, and, you know, kind of placing all these you know, these small egg timers around the whole entire scene, and, you know, being very specific and choicey about those and kind of the more bigger moments. So it's, again, a very collaborative process, and, you know, hats off to Christopher and Josh and Adam and Joanna and everyone involved on the creative side, as well as our whole post-production team. It really, I think that's really, it's a testament to both of those episodes being fan favorites and those both being team efforts, because like Major said, it's a team sport, it's post-production sound. And my buddy who's a DJ, he said funk is a team sport. You know, you have your bass player and your drummer and your guitarist and your keyboardist and your singer and your horns, and, you know, everyone's got to find their little space to work in, and we all have to play together in the sandbox to create that ultimate thing. It's kind of really making sure all those Lego pieces have their time to shine and, you know, come together. So yeah, hats off to everyone on all that.
Yeah, I mean, that Christmas thing is really crazy. That was also, you know, just a very difficult thing, like John said, just the idea that these actors are in these very intense moments. The scene with Sugar and her mom in the kitchen, where you know, Sugar's on her knees yelling, you know, begging her, and she's freaking out. You know, when they cut from a shot to shot, you'll still hear one of the actors' other lines going, because they've done it twice. They haven't done it the same way, because who could do that the same way twice? And then you're stuck with this idea of like, what am I going to do with this overlap? And I, you know, really struggle with some of that stuff. Alts were not available to me, and I ended up going into this program we have called Isotope RX, where you can actually see the sound as colors. And I tried drawing out one of the person's syllables and leaving the other person's syllable intact. And I hadn't really done that successfully very often before, and I was lucky enough to get that to work. In some cases, it didn't work. And there's another one of those overlaps where I had to just take one little piece of Jamie Lee Curtis screaming and stretch it out just enough to bridge the gap for Sugar's next yell, like weird things like that you don't normally have to do, because you don't have quite that level of chaos. You don't have quite that level of cutting, and you don't have sort of like, you know, the difficulty of trying to make those things kind of fit together in a certain way that they weren't meant to do. And that goes into the argument at the table, where they're all just screaming all at the same time, or they'll have, you know, some great line from Bob Odenkirk, but then it interferes with somebody else's line. You'll hear them both on the same take as they cut from one shot to the other. That's always something in this in that show that was just something that happened over and over again, just from because the style of doing it. These people were probably very much improvising what their reactions were, and they can never count on something happening the same way twice, and so you just had to roll with whatever they had there. But just an example is as how good a recordist Scott is at the very end of the shot, when you have her in the car, and he's you know, I'm spacing on the brother's name. He's out there screaming "Mom"
Michael.
over and over again, right? And they have they have a mic in the car with her. They have her mic. They also have the car plant mic in the car, so you can just get, as he's shouting through the car and you're inside the car with her, you can just have that mic that's in there. He just put microphones everywhere. So while that makes it possible to salvage everything, it also makes it a lot of stuff to wade through. And he can't count on when these actors are going to suddenly get very excited, and so there's distortion. And same issue, we have now tools that we didn't have a couple of years ago that can mostly eliminate distortion. Remarkably effective things. And in the past, I don't know what we would have done with half those things. So it's a combination of all these things that you have, that, you know, the ability to fix things that you normally were unfixable, and the fact that there's just so much material that we get from the recorders that's well done, that you can usually work your way around some of those situations.
I will say that those two episodes, in lesser hands, in an overall sense, I think could have been very gimmicky. I mean, they are gimmicky, but they are gimmicky in service of the show. I mean, it's a one shot, which a lot of times on some shows, it's just like a technical flex. It's like, hey, look what we can do. But in this case, it lends itself to the intensity of the episode. Like, I think it's warranted for sure. And the other one is a flashback guest star vehicle, but my goodness, does it work? So I think that just speaks to the level of show it is, that like these two episodes in lesser hands could very well be not fan favorites. And the fact that these two shows really rise above the rest of the stellar episodes, I think it's really great.
Yeah, it could have been Christmas special where you're like,
Yeah.
but it's actually turned into like a Christmas like special episode. It's like everyone.
A very special
Seriously,
episode of the bear.
They could have had a musical. It would have been.
It's funny. It's like I try not to tell people like too much, like random people, or when I'm talking to friends and what I work on and whatever. Sometimes it comes up in conversation, and that very recently, a lot of times that episode, people are like, "Oh my god, the episode Fishes is amazing." I went hiking up upstate the other week and ended up in an antique shop in the town right before we went hiking, and was talking to these ladies, and they're like, "Oh, my son loves that show," and then we exchanged emails because she was a very friendly lady. And then she wrote me back. She's like, my son says, he loved that episode Fishes and the sound was amazing for that. And it's just really cool to have that feedback, just totally unsolicited. I don't even want to tell them what I do for a living. And then through conversation, it happens. So it's really a testament to going with doing something special that actually turns out special, instead of, hey, we need to have a guest star to make the show appealing, for other people, to make this, get the viewers in. It was like they could have not done that and still had an amazing episode, but just took it over the top.
Yeah, I think there is so much. There's so much that goes on with it all, and like I don't know. It's very hard as an audience member to sort of just say like what you just get sucked in, and I guess like in a way you are sort of part of the family, and you're a fly on the wall, and you kind of just get. Everything kind of sucks you in what's happening and the chaos, and you just go with it. I think sometimes, even as an audience member, you could be taken out by just how chaotic it could be, and you could be like, no, I'm not watching this, I'm taking this off. But at the same time, I think it's also a testament to each department and how they work, is that you're all sucked in and you're just in it, and you're there for the ride. And especially with like the Fishers episode, where it's a lot longer episode than all the other episodes in the series, and it still feels so tight and so quick that you don't feel it being an hour long.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, it's pretty riveting.
And you're just sucked in. Just to sort of hit at the sort of penultimate questions with you guys. Let's start with Evan. What was your favorite scene to edit the dialogue in?
Favorite scene? Probably that church scene in episode 8 of season 1, just because it was so, you knew it's like, it really matters. Every last tiny little thing you do, every granular fix you're doing is important because it's so focused on him. I just thought that was pretty kind of rewarding at the end to do, for sure.
Solid choice. I guess like sometimes it is those quieter scenes that you get to show off a bit more rather than those chaotic scenes. And again, it's a testament to everybody that works on it, because as you mentioned before, the scene is about 7 or 8 minutes long and you don't feel it at all. It actually feels like it's just it's weird to say as an audience member, not to be like clock watching, but you're so sucked into all of it that it doesn't feel, you're just like, wow, I can't believe that was that long. And also as an actor like Jeremy, being able to go through such a dialogue heavy scene for so long as well, it's just like
well, I'll give you another one that's kind of funny, but I don't know if I enjoyed it as much, but I thought it was a funny scene that I kind of got a kick out of. Was when they're struggling over a giant balloon that they're trying to force into the back of a car, and because of the shortcomings of where they're miking it, they can't put a boom there because it's a far shot, and so they're stuck with the 2 lav mics. And of course, what is the balloon bumping into? It's bumping into those lav mics. And so you are forced to, and there's just a lot of rubbing against it. I wouldn't say it was a favorite because it was very challenging and difficult to do, but that is sort of rewarding at the end when you get something passable out of it. But it was just a hilarious thing to do. And you realize that's an example of, there's a reason why something is as difficult as it is, and you can try to make the best out of it. But that's I think that's pretty entertaining scene, watching them fighting over that.
For the party, like the giant, I don't know, you see it at car sales, isn't it? The person with the arms.
The wacky waving inflatable floating arm man.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone actually knows what the real term is for that guy, but whoever invented him has probably made a lot of money from something like that. And John, what was your favorite scene to create the sound design in?
It's so tough to really pinpoint that, because we have almost in every episode at least like 1 or 2 spots where we really get to kind of go to town. I think from this past season 2, episode 3, during Sydney's kind of inspirational tour of the city of Chicago and cooking, I spent a lot of time really putting in really going to town on the sound effects on that. And I know a lot of it maybe not doesn't cut through the mix. A lot of it we ended up muting or thinning out, but when you play that on its own, you could really see the detail that we really did. And so many of these shots are like less than a second long, and just trying to get those to all fit, a boiling water to a flame to one train to another, and then making that fit with the music is, it was very challenging, but very rewarding in the end. Same with like all these like little panic ramps, like whether it be the end of episode 1 in the season, the fun stuff of just like putting in tons of construction sounds, and the what's her face Sugar in the bathroom with the toilet going up and exploding, and there was actually like they really had the toilet kind of burping up water, and so it was like, how do we layer that like with the production sound of that? Richie's takeover in episode 10, the last episode at the expo, we really went to town with the fast cutty sound effects for that. There's just so many spaces to really do that, and then there's a lot of spaces where I did go to town that don't make it into the final edit. So when we talk about the last episode of season 1, when Carm's doing this whole fake TV show, fake cooking show, and he's got the fake audience, and they had tempted in some laughter, fake canned studio laughter. And so I was like, okay, let's put in bolstered, very good studio reaction laughter. We want it to still sound canned, like almost like Eric Andre show, like an Adult Swim type of thing. And then they would have like these like little glitch moments in that. And it was just like, they would just put in temporarily like some glitch sound. And then I would be like, okay, well, all these sounds that I created for that, arcade game Ball Breaker, I'm like, I'm going to use those as like, because they were all very noisy atonal kind of sounds, and just like punch through the mix with those, for all these like little glitch moments where he's flashing back and the TV screen goes haywire and he sees the bear, and then I go back to the bear growling sounds that I put in for episode 1, and and then all of a sudden that ramps up into this panic, and then it goes into his apartment, he's panicking down, and I actually had created some very cool clock rhythmic motif piece for that, for the second scene in season 1, episode 10, right after he kind of like, wakes up from this whole kind of crazy panic situation. But we did mute out the kind of, because it was a little too on the nose as a music kind of thing. But, just being able to play with that and try to do stuff like that, use those motifs of time and stress, and, really play into the panic and anxiety that he was feeling, which we, start to learn about more and more with his with his monologue that Evan worked on, and, with season 2, episode 6, Fishes, where we kind of see where the trauma stems from. So many moments, just, it's really hard to pin it down to one, and, and Major, I'm sure, can attest to how much more we really, we could have pushed things even crazier, but making it fit, and, having his creativity to kind of take what we're putting, what I'm putting out there for him, and what Matt was also doing on season 2 with us, Matt Sneedcore, the other effects editor, and being able to kind of say, how do we make that fit? How do we make that work? How do we really massage that in? As good as it is for me, it's, it's really passing the buck on, and, giving the credit to people like Major and everyone involved on this, because it's not just working in a silo. It is very much a team sport.
I can, again, it probably has, with a show like this, it is difficult to pick a favorite scene. I think if you had to put me on the spot, don't know what I would choose, because there's so many to choose from. And that's the problem a little bit. But then also there are some solid choices, and there's scenes that you mentioned as well that I forgot. And like the TV talk show scene, I forgot that was in season 1 and those moments. But then also there's certain dream sequences, like the transition in episode 1 where they're on the bridge with the bear, and then it transitions to the kitchen and hits with the needle drop of a song, and then like the rush around of like getting things ready for what's happening next, for when they're opening for the video game.
Yeah, that one was really difficult, but because this is actually, I worked on that scene probably 2 years ago, almost to the date. And first of all, just making those bear sounds like sound realistic, because it's obviously not a real bear, and some of those growls were extremely long, and just trying to like figure out like, how can I create that? I was using like grizzly bear sounds, and bolstering it and layering it to kind of like create these things, and then adding all the other elements to really push into that kind of transition, and waking up the boom boom boom, the kitchen's going crazy, and then Major kind of reworking it from there in the remix. And shout out to Jeff, from Bronx Audio, who worked on the pilot initially. I mean, he did a fantastic job too, and he's also a friend of all of ours, actually. So trying to make that all work and fit together it is really a monumental task. Yeah, exactly. Like season 1, episode 1 with the ball breaker, all the crazy sounds that we were putting in for that. And then there's the sounds that just don't even make it. I can't remember what episode this was. Mage might be able to remember where Sydney.
Get over it, John. Sometimes things get muted.
I know it's like it's so hard not to like take it personally. Sometimes you're like, oh my god, I spent all this time and I had such a great vision, and you're just like, and you may just like, hey, awesome. You and I will be the only ones who will ever hear this. Mute. And you're just like, no, whatever. It's fun. One great example of that is I can't remember what episode it was, but it was a Sydney-focused episode in season 1 where it starts out her waking up and she's having this flashback moment of when she opened up the her own restaurant. You see like pictures of fire, from the grill and shrimp on the Barbie and all that type of stuff. And she's kind of being woken up by, I think it was a train passing, and they so. I went to town with creating, all these, both the hard effects for like whether it was a fire thing or that, and then the glitchy stuff, and then these whooshy things, and then on top of that, I built this whole, instead of being woken up by a train, because they love using the train sounds in the store, like Chicago, the L trains keep on coming. I said, let's try something different. I said, how about an obnoxious car just passing by blasting music? So I built that out, and then as a big kind of like motif riser, because there was no score there, and it was just kind of like her just kind of staring, kind of like waking up in the morning and just kind of like remembering all this. It's like, I'm going to kind of build like a pseudo score here with like clocks, like a bunch of different clock sounds, like building this whole entire thing. And so it's like this, in my head, this masterpiece I built. Major listens like, hey, awesome, but they're going to 100% just want that train sound, and we're going to take some of the hard effects that you use, and that's kind of that. And I was like, yeah, I figured as much. I had a 99% confidence level that was not going to make it in. But, again, it's trying and giving us, that creative license to really, experiment. And, and as we get more and more into the show, they trust us more to kind of mess with things, and we get to pitch them more on ideas. So maybe in this season, we could have played with that a bit more. But hats off to Major for being able to really recognize like where this is going to work within the confines of the story, and where we kind of get to push and punch a bit more, and where we kind of have to lay back a bit more.
Let's just jump to Major. What was your favorite scene to mix?
I liked. I'll give you 2. The review, season 1, episode 7. It's just it's unique and was fun, and I got to do some things I couldn't normally do. So that was a good one. And I really liked the season finale of season 2. The beginning part there with going between the two, the kitchen and then the front of house and back and forth.
That was fun to watch. That was fun to watch.
It was a fun experiment. A lot of loop group. Shout out Dan Fink and his loop group crew in New York. That was a pretty unique. It was a oneer, but like they didn't really make a meal of it, because I think that would have been too much. It was one shot for I think the first like 8 minutes or something, and just kind of going back and forth those two environments. It was really fun. It was a fun time.
And then just to wrap up the episode, as FX is the Bear is centered around food, what would be your signature dish to cook?
I make a really good pasta with a white sauce with kale and cannellini beans. It's delicious, nice and earthy, a little bit of white wine in there. That's my go-to.
Nice.
Garlic bread.
I'm realizing now he's a vegetarian, so it's kind of ironic that he's working on this. So I feel like I just thought of that now.
This show disgusts me. No, I don't care.
I need to go to a red meat. I make a good brisket. How about that?
Okay.
I guess my go-to is probably making schnitzel, like fried chicken cutlets. Really perfected it doing it with a layer of first flour, then you dip it in the egg, then you dip it in a mix of panko and breadcrumbs and some different spices. Tenderize it before you get like the best chicken cutlets ever, and
all right,
I'll have that with salad. Yeah, exactly. You guys are welcome. I'll make some vegetarian schnitzel as well.
That's
perfect.
Terrible.
I'm there. Major, Evan, John, thank you so much for your time. FX is the Bear streaming on Hulu, but in the UK you can catch it on Disney Plus. Thank you guys so much for your time.
Thanks so much, Bobby.
Thanks for having us.
Bob.
You guys take care, and thank you again, and bye-bye.
Thanks, man.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.